In Part 1, Grace Jones went from invisible to seen when billionaire Ethan Davis asked her to pretend to be his girlfriend at her twin sister's wedding. What started as a performance became real. What began as a contract became love. But their happiness was shattered when Liam Rogers, Ethan's trusted deputy, framed him for money laundering, stole millions, and set a trap that could destroy everything. Grace fought back. She uncovered the truth, traced the money, exposed Liam's conspiracy, and Liam retaliated. He broke into her apartment, stole her evidence, and gave them an ultimatum. Ethan surrenders in 48 hours, or they both go down. Grace sat on the floor of her violated home, trembling, with one impossible question burning in her mind. How do you save the person you love when the enemy has already won? Now the clock is ticking. The danger is real. And the choice Grace is about to make will change everything. Grace sat on the floor of her ransacked apartment for what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall told her only 15 minutes had passed. Her mind spun in circles, trying to find a way out, a solution that didn't end with Ethan in prison or herself as the reason for his downfall. She had to tell him. That much was clear. Whatever Liam threatened, whatever consequences followed, Ethan deserved to know what was coming. Her hands were still shaking when she dialed his number. He answered immediately, his voice tight with concern. "Grace? Rebecca told me about the interview. Are you okay?" "Ethan, someone broke into my apartment." The words tumbled out in a rush. "They took my laptop, all the files, everything. And then Liam called me." Silence. Then in a voice so cold it sent shivers down her spine. "What did he say?" Grace closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against her knees. "He wants you to step down, to take responsibility for the money laundering. He said if you don't, he'll release more evidence that will guarantee your conviction." Son of a bitch. She could hear movement on his end, the sound of something hitting a wall. "Did he threaten you? Physically?" "Not directly, but Ethan." Grace's voice broke. "This is my fault. I shouldn't have dug into his finances. I shouldn't have—" "Stop." Ethan's voice was firm. "This is not your fault. Liam has been planning this for months, maybe years. You just happened to be smart enough to figure it out. But now he knows that we know. And he's going to destroy you." "Let him try." There was steel in Ethan's voice now, the same controlled fury she'd seen glimpses of in the boardroom. "I'm not stepping down. I'm not taking the fall for his crimes. And I'm sure as hell not letting him use you as leverage." "What are we going to do?" "Right now. You're going to pack a bag and get out of that apartment. I'm sending a car to pick you up." Grace's heart stuttered. "Ethan." "Please, Grace, don't argue with me on this. If Liam knows where you live, if he's already broken in once, you're not safe there." His voice softened. "Let me protect you. It's the only thing I can control right now." Grace looked around her destroyed apartment, the violated space that no longer felt like home, and nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Okay. The car will be there in 10 minutes. Bring whatever you need for a few days." Grace ended the call and moved mechanically through the apartment, throwing clothes into a duffel bag. Her hands found the navy dress she'd worn to Olivia's wedding, still hanging in the back of her closet, and something in her chest clenched. 3 weeks ago, she had been invisible, unknown, safely tucked away from the world's scrutiny. Now she was caught in the middle of a conspiracy that could destroy everything. The town car arrived exactly when Ethan said it would. Grace locked her apartment door, though the gesture felt hollow now, and climbed into the back seat. The driver said nothing as they pulled into traffic, heading toward the ocean, and Grace realized with a jolt where they were going. The beach house. The place Ethan had told her he'd never brought anyone before. Ethan was waiting on the deck when the car pulled up, the wind off the ocean whipping his dark hair. He moved toward her the moment she stepped out, his hands framing her face, his eyes scanning her as if checking for injuries. "You're okay," he said, and it sounded like a prayer. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. Ethan pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with a desperation that made her breath hitch. She could feel his heart hammering, could feel the barely contained fury vibrating through his body. "I'm going to fix this," he murmured against her hair. "I swear to you, Grace, I'm going to fix this." Grace pulled back just enough to look up at him. "How? Liam has all the evidence. He has leverage. What can we possibly do in 48 hours? Ethan's jaw tightened. "We find proof that he's behind it. Real proof, not just financial connections. Something undeniable." "How?" "I don't know yet." He released her, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "But I know someone who might be able to help. Marcus has been going through the company servers, looking for any communication between Liam and outside parties. If Liam was coordinating with someone to set this up, there will be traces, emails, messages, something." Grace followed him inside the beach house. It looked exactly as it had before, simple, lived in, real. But now it felt like a sanctuary, a place where the outside world couldn't quite reach them. Ethan's laptop was already open on the kitchen table, multiple windows displaying financial records and email logs. He sat down heavily, and Grace pulled a chair beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Show me what you have," she said. For the next 6 hours, they worked in tandem. Ethan walked Grace through the company's internal systems while she cross-referenced timestamps and transaction codes. Marcus sent updates every hour, fragments of deleted emails, authorization logs that didn't quite match up, metadata that suggested files had been backdated. It was painstaking work, the kind that made Grace's eyes burn and her head ache, but slowly, painfully, a picture began to emerge. Liam had been careful, almost impossibly careful, but he had made one critical mistake. "Here," Grace said, her finger stabbing at the screen. "Look at this email from Liam to an external consultant. It's dated 6 months ago, requesting a template package for executive authorization documents. That consultant's company is registered in the Cayman Islands." Ethan leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. "That's not standard procedure. Why would he need templates for my authorization?" "Because he was planning to forge them." Grace's pulse quickened. "If we can prove he commissioned those templates, we can prove he had the tools to create fake documents with your signature." Ethan pulled up another window, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "The consultant's company. It's a shell, registered to a P.O. box, but there has to be a payment trail." They dug deeper. Payment records showed a wire transfer from Liam's personal account to the Cayman company, carefully disguised as a consulting fee. But the amount, $50,000, was far too large for a simple template creation. "He paid for more than templates," Grace said slowly. "He paid for the actual forged documents." Ethan's eyes met hers, and she saw the same realization dawn on his face. "We have him." But even as relief flooded through her, Grace felt a chill of apprehension. "Ethan, if we release this, if we go to the police with this evidence, Liam will know, and he'll retaliate. Let him." Ethan's voice was hard. "I'm done playing defense. It's time to go on the offensive." He reached for his phone, but before he could dial, it rang in his hand. An unknown number. Ethan's expression darkened, and he answered on speaker. "Davis. Mr. Davis." Liam's smooth voice filled the small kitchen. "I was hoping we could have a conversation, man to man." Ethan's hand clenched around the phone. "I have nothing to say to you." "Not even about Ms. Jones's safety?" Grace's blood ran cold. Ethan's eyes snapped to hers, his face going pale. "If you touch her, relax. I'm not a monster. I'm simply pointing out that she's currently at your beach house in Monterey, which is quite isolated this time of year. Anything could happen out there. Accidents, break-ins, fires." Grace's hands went numb. He knew where they were. He had known all along. "What do you want, Liam?" Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. "I want you to accept reality. You've lost, Ethan. The company is mine. Your reputation is destroyed. The longer you fight this, the worse it gets for everyone involved, including Grace. Liam paused. 48 hours, remember. But I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you until tomorrow night to make your decision. After that, Grace becomes a much more interesting part of this story. The devoted girlfriend who helped her criminal boyfriend hide assets. I have her laptop, remember? I can make that narrative very convincing. The line went dead. Grace stared at the phone, her mind reeling. Liam wasn't just threatening Ethan anymore. He was threatening her, threatening to frame her as an accomplice. We need to leave, Ethan said, already moving. Right now, this place isn't safe. Where are we going to go? Grace asked, her voice hollow. Somewhere public, somewhere he can't touch us without witnesses. Ethan grabbed his laptop, shoving it into a bag. We're going to the police. We're giving them everything we have on Liam. And then we're going to make sure he can't hurt you. Grace caught his arm. Ethan, wait. If we go to the police now, with just this evidence, will it be enough? Will they believe us? Ethan's jaw worked. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the terrible weighing of options. I don't know, he admitted finally. But staying here, doing nothing, that's not an option either. Grace's mind raced. There had to be another way. Something they were missing. The consultant, she said suddenly. The one in the Cayman Islands. If we could get them to testify to confirm that Liam commissioned the forged documents. They won't, Ethan interrupted. People like that don't talk. That's why they charge $50,000. But what if we could prove the documents came from them, match them to the templates? Then we wouldn't need their testimony. Ethan went very still. The metadata, he said slowly. When Liam created those forged authorizations, he would have used the templates, which means the digital signatures, the embedded data. It would all point back to the original file creation. Grace's pulse quickened. Can Marcus access that? Maybe, if the files are still on the company servers. Ethan pulled out his phone, dialing quickly. Marcus, I need you to pull the metadata on every authorization document that's been flagged as suspicious. I need creation dates, software used, digital fingerprints, everything. There was a pause. Then Marcus's voice came through, tinny and stressed. Mr. Davis, I'm already getting pushback from IT. Liam's been restricting access to certain files. He's saying it's to preserve evidence for the investigation, but he's covering his tracks, Ethan finished. Marcus, how much access do you still have? Limited. But I might be able to pull some files before he locks me out completely. Do it. Send everything you can to my personal email. We're running out of time. Ethan ended the call and looked at Grace. His face was pale, tension carved into every line of his features. Even if Marcus gets those files, it might not be enough. Liam has had months to perfect his setup. We're trying to unravel it in hours. Grace stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. They were cold, trembling slightly, the first real crack in his control she'd seen. Then we need to make him show his hand, she said quietly. Make him do something reckless, something that exposes him. Ethan's eyes searched hers. How? Grace's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. We tell him we're going to the media, that we're releasing everything we have, the Cayman connection, the forged signatures, all of it. He'll panic, and when people panic, they make mistakes. Grace, that puts a target on your back. The target's already there, she said. At least this way, we're controlling the narrative. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, and Grace watched something shift in his expression. Fear warring with admiration, protectiveness battling against respect. You're sure? He asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips, the same thing she'd said when she agreed to his original proposition, a lifetime ago in Napa Valley. Then his expression hardened, and he nodded once. Then we do it together. They left the beach house at dusk, the sky bleeding orange and purple over the ocean. Ethan drove in tense silence, his hands tight on the wheel, his jaw set in that hard line Grace had come to recognize as him trying to hold everything together. She sat beside him, her phone clutched in her lap, rehearsing in her mind what she would say when they confronted Liam. The plan was simple, almost recklessly so. They would call Liam, tell him they were going to a major news outlet with everything they had. Then they would wait. Wait for him to react, to make the mistake that would expose him. It was a gamble. But Grace was learning that sometimes, when you had nothing left to lose, gambling was the only option. They checked into a hotel in downtown San Francisco, a large corporate chain where people came and went without notice. Ethan paid cash and registered under a false name, his face carefully neutral as the desk clerk processed their key cards. Only when they were safely behind the locked door of their room did he finally exhale, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. Grace set her bag down and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. Behind her, she heard Ethan pacing, his phone pressed to his ear as he checked in with Marcus. The conversation was brief, clipped, and when he hung up, the silence that followed felt heavy. "Marcus got the files," Ethan said finally. "The metadata shows that all the flagged documents were created using the same software package, specialized authorization template software, not something we use internally." Grace turned. "So it proves they were forged. It proves they came from an external source. Whether that's enough to convince the police..." He shook his head. "I don't know, but it's something." Grace crossed the room to where he stood, close enough to see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged with the weight of everything pressing down on him. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his face, her palm against his cheek. "We're going to get through this," she said quietly. Ethan's hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his face. "You keep saying that. But Grace, you need to understand, if this goes wrong, Liam won't just destroy me. He'll destroy you too. Your reputation, your career, maybe worse." "I know." "Then why are you still here?" The question hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Grace felt her throat tighten, felt all the careful walls she'd built around her feelings beginning to crumble. "Because this stopped being pretend the moment you told me about your mother," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe even before that. I don't know when exactly it happened, but somewhere along the way, you became real to me. This became real." Ethan's eyes closed, and Grace watched something break behind his careful control. "Grace, I love you," she interrupted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it's too soon. I know it's complicated and messy and probably the worst possible timing, but I love you, and I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then he pulled her against him with a fierceness that stole her breath, his arms wrapping around her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had tilted off its axis. "I love you too," he whispered against her hair, his voice rough. "God, Grace, I love you. I think I have since that first night at the wedding, when you looked at me like I might actually be human." Grace's chest ached with the enormity of it. She pulled back just enough to look up at him, and what she saw in his face, the vulnerability, the fear, the desperate hope, made her heart break and mend all at once. "Then we fight," she said. "Together, whatever happens." Ethan's hand cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Together," he repeated. And then he was kissing her, and Grace forgot about Liam, about conspiracies and forged documents and everything else. There was only this, the warmth of his mouth against hers, the solid weight of his body, the way he held her like she was something precious and breakable and impossibly strong all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "We should call Liam," he said, though he made no move to let her go. "I know. Are you ready?" Grace thought about the girl who had sat alone at her sister's wedding 3 weeks ago, invisible and forgotten. That girl would have said no, would have run. But Grace wasn't that girl anymore. "Yes," she said. Ethan released her slowly, reluctantly, and pulled out his phone. He dialed Liam's number and put the call on speaker, setting the phone on the desk between them. It rang 3 times before Liam answered, his voice smooth and unsurprised. "Ethan, I was wondering when you'd call." "We're done playing your games, Liam," Ethan said, his voice hard. "We know about the Cayman consultant. We know about the forged authorization templates. We have the metadata proving those documents came from an external source." There was a pause. Then Liam laughed, a low, genuinely amused sound. "Do you? That's impressive. More impressive than I gave you credit for, honestly. But Ethan, you're missing the bigger picture." "What bigger picture?" "That none of it matters. You can have all the metadata in the world, all the digital forensics and expert testimony. But at the end of the day, those authorizations bear your signature, your codes, your approval. The company was under your control when those transactions occurred. Any good prosecutor will argue that you simply used a consultant to create the infrastructure for your own crimes." Grace felt cold spread through her chest. Liam was right. The evidence they had was circumstantial at best. It raised questions, but it didn't definitively prove Ethan's innocence. "So you're just going to get away with it," Ethan said flatly. "I already have gotten away with it. The question now is what you're going to do about it. Accept defeat gracefully, or go down fighting and take everyone you care about with you." Liam's voice hardened. "Including Ms. Jones." Grace stepped closer to the phone. "We're going to the media," she said. "Every major outlet we can reach. We're going to tell them everything. About the forged documents, about your payments to offshore consultants, about your threats. Even if it's not enough to convict you in court, it'll destroy your credibility." Liam was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its smooth edge. "That would be very unwise, Ms. Jones." "Why? Because you'll frame me as an accomplice? Go ahead. At least people will know the truth about you." "The truth?" Liam laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "The truth is that you're a nobody who got in over her head. The media will eat you alive." "Maybe," Grace said, "but they'll eat you alive too, and that's worth it." She could hear Liam breathing on the other end, could almost feel his fury radiating through the phone. "You're making a mistake." "No," Ethan said quietly. "You made the mistake. You underestimated Grace. You thought she'd be easy to scare off, easy to intimidate. But she's stronger than you'll ever be. We'll see about that." The line went dead. Grace stared at the phone, her heart hammering. Beside her, Ethan ran a hand through his hair, tension vibrating through every line of his body. "He's going to retaliate," Grace said. "I know, but at least now he knows we're not backing down." Ethan turned to her. "Grace, I need you to promise me something. If this gets worse, if Liam comes after you directly, you'll walk away. You'll let me handle it." "I'm not walking away." "Grace, no." She grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. "You don't get to protect me by pushing me away. We're in this together, remember? You said it yourself." Ethan's jaw worked, but finally he nodded. Together. The call came at 3 in the morning. Grace woke to the sound of Ethan's phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. He grabbed it before the second ring, his voice hoarse with sleep. "Davis." Grace sat up, watching his face go pale in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "When?" he asked sharply. "How bad?" There was a pause. Then, "I'm on my way." He ended the call and was out of bed immediately, pulling on clothes with swift mechanical movements. Grace threw off the covers. "What happened?" "Fire," Ethan said, his voice flat. "At my office. The entire executive floor is burning." Grace's blood went cold. "Liam, has to be." Ethan yanked on his shoes, his hands shaking slightly. "The server room is on that floor. All our physical records, backups, everything Marcus pulled for us. If Liam's destroyed it, then we have nothing," Grace finished. Ethan's eyes met hers, and she saw the devastation there. Without the server data, without the files Marcus had retrieved, they had no way to prove the documents were forged, no way to connect Liam to the Cayman consultant. Nothing but circumstantial evidence and accusations. "I have to go," Ethan said. "The fire department. The police? They'll have questions. I'm coming with you." "Grace, don't argue. We said together and I meant it." Ethan stared at her for a moment, then nodded once. They dressed quickly and left the hotel, climbing into Ethan's car. The drive to his office felt surreal, the city quiet and dark around them, emergency lights painting the sky ahead in shades of red and orange. The scene when they arrived was chaos. Fire trucks blocked the street, hoses spraying water up toward the building where flames still licked from shattered windows on the upper floors. Police had cordoned off the area, and a crowd of onlookers had gathered despite the late hour, phones out, recording. Ethan pushed through to the police line, Grace close behind him. An officer stopped them, but Ethan pulled out his ID. "I'm Ethan Davis. This is my building." The officer's expression shifted, recognition, then something that might have been pity. "Mr. Davis, Detective Morris wants to speak with you." Of course it was Morris. Grace felt a chill as the detective appeared, his face grim in the flickering light. "Mr. Davis, Ms. Jones." Morris's gaze moved between them. "I'm sorry about your building. Fire Marshal's preliminary assessment is that it started in the server room. Possible electrical fire, but they're investigating arson." "It was arson," Ethan said flatly. Morris's eyebrows rose. "You sound certain." "I am certain. Liam Rogers did this to destroy evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Of his guilt." Ethan's voice was strained. "The evidence we've been gathering to prove he framed me. It was all in that server room." Morris exchanged a glance with his partner. "Mr. Davis, I need you to be very careful about making accusations without proof." "The proof just went up in flames," Ethan interrupted. "That's the whole point." "Actually," a new voice said, "not all of it." Grace turned to see Marcus approaching, his face smudged with ash, his clothes disheveled. He was holding a laptop bag clutched against his chest, like a lifeline. "Marcus!" Ethan's voice was sharp. "What are you doing here?" "I was working late. I've been sleeping in my office since all this started. Figured it was safer than going home." Marcus glanced at the burning building. "When I smelled smoke, I grabbed everything I could, including this." He opened the laptop bag, pulling out a hard drive and several USB sticks. Backups of everything. The metadata files, the Cayman payment records, email logs, all of it. I've been keeping offline copies just in case. Grace felt her knees go weak with relief. Beside her, Ethan exhaled sharply. "Marcus, you're getting a raise, a massive one." Morris stepped forward. "What exactly is on those drives, Mr. Davis?" Ethan looked at the detective, and Grace saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. "Evidence that Liam Rogers has been embezzling from my company and framing me for money laundering. If you'll give me access to a computer, I'll show you everything." The police station at 4 in the morning was a different kind of hell. Fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly, the smell of burnt coffee, and the weight of exhaustion pressing down on everyone in the building. Grace sat in a hard plastic chair outside the conference room where Ethan and Marcus were walking Detective Morris through the evidence, her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee that had long since gone cold. Rebecca Chen had arrived within an hour of their call, somehow looking perfectly composed despite the ungodly hour. She sat beside Grace now, scrolling through something on her phone, her expression unreadable. "How long do you think they'll be?" Grace asked quietly. Rebecca glanced up. "As long as it takes. Financial forensics isn't quick work, especially when you're trying to prove a conspiracy." She studied Grace for a moment. "How are you holding up?" Grace let out a hollow laugh. "I don't know. 3 weeks ago I was invisible. Now I'm sitting in a police station at 4 a.m., waiting to find out if the man I love is going to prison for crimes he didn't commit." "You love him?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I think he loves you too. I've known Ethan for 6 years, represented him through multiple legal matters. I've never seen him let anyone in the way he's let you in. Grace's throat tightened. That's what scares me. What if I'm the reason all this happened? If I hadn't started digging into Liam's finances, then Ethan would have been convicted of crimes he didn't commit, and Liam would have gotten away with it completely. Rebecca interrupted firmly. Grace, you didn't cause this. Liam caused this. You just had the courage to fight back. Before Grace could respond, the conference room door opened. Ethan emerged, his face drawn with exhaustion but something else in his eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. Behind him, Detective Morris wore an expression Grace couldn't quite read. Miss Jones, Morris said, we'd like to ask you a few more questions. About the break-in at your apartment and the subsequent contact from Liam Rogers. Grace stood, her legs unsteady. Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Tell them everything, he said quietly. Every detail. It matters now. Grace followed Morris back into the conference room. For the next 2 hours, she walked them through everything. Liam's phone call, his threats, the way he'd known they were at the beach house. She showed them her phone records, the timeline of events, the violated sanctity of her ransacked apartment. Marcus corroborated her story with server logs, showing that someone had accessed Ethan's personal calendar remotely, tracking his location. The digital fingerprints led back to Liam's work computer. Slowly, painstakingly, a picture emerged. Not just of financial fraud, but of stalking, harassment, destruction of evidence. Crimes that were harder to dismiss or explain away. When Grace finally emerged from the conference room, dawn was breaking outside the station windows. Ethan was waiting for her, and the moment their eyes met, she knew. They're going to arrest him, he said quietly. Morris is getting a warrant now. Grace's knees buckled, and Ethan caught her, pulling her against his chest. She felt tears, hot and unexpected, spill down her cheeks. It's over? Not yet. There's still a trial, still months of legal proceedings. But Grace, his voice broke slightly. You did it. You saved me. Grace pulled back to look at him, her vision blurred. We saved each other. The arrest happened that afternoon. Grace wasn't there to see it. Rebecca had strongly advised them both to stay away, to let the police handle it. But the news spread quickly. By evening, every major outlet was running the story. Tech Billionaire's deputy arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Ethan Davis cleared of all charges. Grace watched the coverage from Ethan's apartment, a place she'd never been before, sleek and modern and somehow lonely despite its size. Ethan sat beside her on the couch, his hand clasped in hers, as a reporter detailed Liam's perp walk, his face carefully blank as officers led him away in handcuffs. He looked so ordinary, Grace said quietly, like he could be anyone. That's what made him dangerous, Ethan replied. No one suspected him because he looked like he belonged. Grace thought about that. About belonging, about visibility, about the ways people could hide in plain sight. She had spent so long trying to be invisible, thinking it would keep her safe. But safety, she'd learned, wasn't the absence of danger. It was having someone who would stand beside you when danger came. Ethan's phone buzzed with incoming messages. Congratulations from colleagues, apologies from board members, requests for interviews. He silenced it without looking, his attention remaining fixed on Grace. What happens now? She asked. Now? Ethan's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Now I rebuild. The company, my reputation, my life. It won't be easy. The damage Liam did, it's going to take time to undo. You won't be alone, Grace said. Not anymore. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Vulnerability and gratitude and love all tangled together. Grace, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Grace's pulse quickened. Okay. The contract we signed, the arrangement we made, It's void now. Technically, legally, you're not obligated to stay. You could walk away right now, go back to your life, and I wouldn't blame you." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But I'm asking you not to. I'm asking you to stay, not because of any agreement, but because you want to. Because this, us, is real." Grace felt her eyes burn with fresh tears. "Ethan, I told you I loved you. Did you think I was going to change my mind? I thought you might realize that loving me comes with complications, media attention, scrutiny, people comparing you to other women I've dated, questioning what you want from me." His voice dropped. "I thought you might decide it's not worth it." Grace shifted to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "3 weeks ago, I was invisible. I was the other twin, the one people forgot about, the one who disappeared in crowded rooms. You saw me when no one else did. You made me feel like I mattered." She squeezed his hands hard. "So yes, there will be complications. Yes, people will judge and question and compare. But I spent my whole life hiding from attention because I was afraid of it. I'm not afraid anymore. Not when I'm with you." Ethan's eyes closed, and Grace watched him struggle against the emotion threatening to break through his careful control. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I don't deserve you," he said hoarsely. "You're right," Grace agreed with a small smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her with a fierceness that spoke of how close he'd come to losing everything. Grace buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, coffee and exhaustion, and something underneath that was just Ethan, and felt something settle in her chest. Home, she realized. This was what home felt like. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and media attention. Liam Rogers's trial became a spectacle, his fall from grace dissected by every news outlet and legal podcast. The evidence Marcus had saved, combined with Grace's testimony about the threats and break-in, painted a damning picture of a man who had spent years methodically destroying his boss in pursuit of power. Grace found herself thrust into the spotlight in ways she'd never imagined. Photographers followed her to coffee shops. Tabloids ran stories about the woman who brought down a corporate empire, with photos from that first gala, analyzing her clothes, her background, her relationship with Ethan. It was overwhelming, invasive, sometimes frightening. But Ethan was there beside her through all of it, shielding her when he could, holding her when he couldn't. And slowly, Grace learned to navigate this new visibility, not by hiding or shrinking, but by standing tall and refusing to apologize for taking up space. Her design business, which had been struggling for months, suddenly found new life. Clients who had never given her a second glance were calling, wanting the woman who helped Ethan Davis. Grace was careful about which projects she accepted, determined not to trade on notoriety alone. But she couldn't deny that opportunity, when it finally came, felt sweet. Olivia called 2 weeks after Liam's arrest, her voice warm with something Grace couldn't quite identify. Pride, maybe, or respect. "I saw you on the news," Olivia said. "Grace, you were incredible. The way you stood up there and testified. I've never seen you like that before. So confident, so strong." Grace leaned against Ethan's kitchen counter, watching him work at his laptop across the room. "I had to be. For him." "No," Olivia said quietly. "I think you had to be for yourself. Ethan just gave you a reason to finally believe you could be." The words stayed with Grace long after the call ended, because Olivia was right, in a way. Ethan hadn't made her strong. Grace had always been strong. He had just helped her see it. 3 months after Liam's arrest, on a cool evening in early spring, Ethan took Grace back to the beach house. They stood on the deck as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ethan's arms were wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, and Grace felt a peace she hadn't known was possible. "I've been thinking," Ethan said quietly. "About what?" "About the future. About what comes next. He paused, and Grace felt him take a deep breath. Grace, I know it hasn't been very long. By conventional standards, we should probably wait. Be practical. Take things slow. Grace turned in his arms to face him, her heart beginning to race. But I'm not a patient man, and I'm tired of pretending I don't know exactly what I want. Ethan's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. I want you. Not for 6 months, not for a year, for forever. Grace's breath caught. Ethan, I'm not asking you to marry me, he said quickly. Not yet. I know there's still so much we need to figure out. So much time we need to spend just being together without crises and conspiracies. But I need you to know that when I look at the future, you're in it. Every part of it. Tears blurred Grace's vision. You're in my future too, she whispered. You have been since that night at Olivia's wedding, when you sat down at my table and saw me for the first time. Ethan smiled. A real smile, soft and unguarded. I see you now, he said, and you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. He kissed her then, slow and tender, as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. And Grace, who had spent so long feeling invisible, finally understood what it meant to be truly, completely seen. 1 year later, Grace stood in front of the mirror in a private suite at a Napa Valley vineyard, smoothing her hands over the silk of her wedding dress. The gown was her own design, ivory with delicate lace along the bodice, simple and elegant, nothing like the extravagant confections she'd seen at Olivia's wedding. This dress was hers, a reflection of who she'd become rather than who the world expected her to be. Behind her, Olivia adjusted the veil, her reflection appearing in the mirror beside Grace's. For a moment, the two of them simply looked at each other, identical faces, but different now in ways that went deeper than appearance. You look perfect, Olivia said softly. Grace turned to face her sister, taking in the genuine warmth in her eyes. Their relationship had shifted over the past year, becoming something more honest, more equal. Olivia no longer needed to shine the brightest in every room, and Grace no longer felt the need to hide in her shadow. I'm terrified, Grace admitted. Of marrying Ethan? No. Of all those people out there. Grace gestured toward the windows overlooking the vineyard, where guests were already gathering. A year ago, I was nobody. Now I'm marrying one of the most watched men in the tech industry, and everyone wants to see if I'll stumble. Olivia took Grace's hands, squeezing them firmly. Then let them watch. Let them see exactly who you are, the woman who brought down a criminal, who stood beside the man she loved when the whole world was against him, who rebuilt her own career on her own terms. Grace, you're not invisible anymore, and you never will be again. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back carefully. Her makeup had taken an hour to perfect, and she refused to ruin it now. Thank you, she whispered, for being here, for understanding. I'm your sister, Olivia said simply. Where else would I be? A knock at the door interrupted them, and their mother stepped inside, elegant in lavender, her eyes bright with emotion. It's time, sweetheart. Grace took a deep breath, steadying herself. 1 year ago, she had walked into a reception at this same vineyard, feeling like an outsider in her own family. Today, she would walk down an aisle toward the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had loved her when she was vulnerable, who had chosen her when he could have had anyone. Today, she would become his wife. The ceremony was held outdoors, beneath the same sprawling oak trees where Olivia's reception had been. But the setup was different. More intimate, more personal. White chairs arranged in a semicircle, strings of lights woven through the branches overhead. Flowers that Grace had chosen herself, peonies and garden roses in shades of blush and cream. As Grace stepped onto the grass, her arm linked through her father's, the music began. Not the traditional wedding march, but something softer, more modern. The guests rose, turning to look at her, and for a moment Grace felt that old instinct to shrink, to disappear. Then she saw Ethan. He stood at the end of the aisle, Marcus beside him as best man, and the expression on his face made Grace's breath catch. There was no mask now, no careful control, just raw emotion, love and awe and barely contained joy written across every feature. Grace's feet moved almost of their own accord, carrying her toward him, toward the future they would build together. When she reached the altar and her father placed her hand in Ethan's, she felt the tremor run through his fingers, nerves perhaps, or simply the weight of this moment. The officiant began to speak, words about love and commitment and the courage it took to choose vulnerability. But Grace barely heard them. She was too focused on Ethan's face, on the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. When it came time for the vows, Ethan spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. Grace, a year ago, I made you a proposition, a business arrangement, a performance. I told you it would be mutually beneficial, that we would help each other navigate a world neither of us felt comfortable in. He paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. I didn't know then that you would become my anchor, my home, the person who would stand beside me when everything fell apart and refused to let me face it alone. His voice roughened. You saw through every wall I'd built, every defense I'd constructed to keep the world at arm's length. You saw me, not the billionaire, not the CEO, just me. And you loved me anyway. You taught me that strength isn't about control. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable with the right person. Ethan's eyes were bright now, tears he didn't bother to hide. So I'm making you a new proposition today. Not a temporary arrangement, not a performance, but a promise. I promise to see you, always, to choose you, every day, to build a life with you where neither of us has to pretend to be anything other than exactly who we are. I promise to love you, Grace Jones, for as long as I draw breath. Grace's own tears were falling freely now, sliding down her cheeks despite her earlier resolution. She squeezed Ethan's hands, steadying herself, and spoke the words she'd rehearsed 100 times, but that felt entirely new in this moment. Ethan, you asked me once why I was still there, why I stayed when things got dangerous. I told you it was because you'd become real to me. But the truth is deeper than that. Grace's voice wavered but held. You didn't just become real to me, you made me real to myself. She felt the weight of every eye on her, but for once, the attention didn't make her want to hide. I spent my whole life being invisible, being the other twin, the one people looked through instead of at. I convinced myself that invisibility was safety, that if I just stayed small enough, quiet enough, I couldn't get hurt. Grace paused, her gaze locked on Ethan's. Then you sat down at my table at Olivia's wedding and saw me. Not my sister's shadow, not someone to be compared or dismissed, just me. And in that moment, everything changed. Her voice strengthened. You gave me the courage to take up space, to speak up, to fight for what mattered, and what matters most is you, is us, is the life we're going to build together, where we get to be completely, honestly ourselves with each other. Grace took a shaky breath. So I promised to stand beside you, not behind you, to be your partner, your equal, your home. I promise to see you, always, all of you, even the parts you're afraid to show. And I promise to love you, Ethan Davis, with everything I am, for the rest of our lives. The officiant's voice broke through the charged silence. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride. Ethan's hands came up to frame Grace's face, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. My wife, he murmured, as if testing the words. Your wife, Grace confirmed. And then he was kissing her, and the world erupted in applause and cheers. But Grace heard none of it. There was only Ethan, only this moment, only the overwhelming rightness of choosing each other in front of everyone who mattered. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "No more pretending," he whispered. "No more pretending," Grace agreed. They turned to face their guests, hand in hand, and walked back down the aisle together. Not as CEO and designer, not as billionaire and unknown, but as partners, as equals, as two people who had found each other in the midst of performance and pretense and chosen to make it real. The reception was held in the same grand hall where Grace had once sat alone at a table by the wall, watching life happen around her. But tonight, she was at the center of it all. Ethan's arm around her waist as they moved through the crowd of well-wishers. Marcus approached, grinning widely, and pulled both of them into an enthusiastic hug. "Congratulations, both of you. Though I have to say, you've set a dangerously high bar for workplace romances." Ethan laughed, a real laugh, open and unguarded. "I don't recommend it. The paperwork alone is nightmare. But worth it," Grace added, leaning into Ethan's side. "Definitely worth it," Marcus agreed. He glanced around the room, then leaned in conspiratorially. "For what it's worth, I knew from that first gala. The way you looked at each other, even then it wasn't fake." Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. Was it that obvious? To someone paying attention? Yes. Marcus's expression turned more serious. "You saved him, Grace, and not just from Liam. You saved him from himself, from the life he'd resigned himself to living." Before Grace could respond, the music shifted, and the DJ announced the first dance. Ethan guided her onto the dance floor, and suddenly they were alone in the center of the room, every eye on them. "Ready?" Ethan murmured. Grace thought about that first gala, about how terrified she'd been of the attention, of the scrutiny. Now, standing in Ethan's arms with the lights shimmering overhead and their future stretching out before them, she felt only certainty. "With you?" she said softly. "Always." They began to move, swaying to the music, and Grace let herself sink into the moment. Ethan's hand was warm at the small of her back, his other hand clasped around hers, and she felt safe in a way she'd never known was possible. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked after a moment. Grace looked up at him, taking in the face she'd come to know so well, the sharp lines that softened when he smiled, the gray eyes that saw straight through to her heart, the careful control that he'd learned to let go of when they were together. "I'm thinking about how a year ago I was sitting in this same room, feeling invisible and alone. And now," her voice caught, "now I have everything I never knew I needed." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "So do I." The song ended, and applause rippled through the crowd. But before they could step apart, the DJ spoke again. "And now, the bride has a special surprise for the groom." Grace felt Ethan's confusion as the lights dimmed and a screen lowered at the far end of the room. Then a video began to play, a montage Grace had secretly compiled over the past months. Photos of them together, starting with those first paparazzi shots from the initial gala, both of them looking stiff and uncertain. Then images from the beach house, from quiet dinners, from the day the charges were dropped. Moments captured by friends and family, showing the gradual softening, the growing comfort, the unmistakable love. But it was the final clip that made Ethan's breath catch. Footage from the day of his exoneration, when he'd emerged from the courthouse to a crowd of reporters. Grace had been beside him, and the camera had caught the moment when he'd turned to her, his facade cracking, and she'd simply taken his hand and held on. The video ended with text appearing on screen. "From performance to promise. From contract to forever. Thank you for seeing me." The lights came back up, and Grace watched Ethan's face, saw the tears he didn't try to hide this time. "Grace, I wanted you to see what I see," she said softly. "How far we've come. How real this became." Ethan pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was witnessed by 200 guests and felt entirely private. When they finally broke apart, his voice was rough with emotion. "I love you," he said, more than I have words for. I love you too, Grace replied, and we have a lifetime to find the words. Hours later, when the reception had wound down and the guests had begun to leave, Grace found herself back on the terrace overlooking the vineyard. The same terrace where, a year ago, she'd escaped the party to catch her breath, to gather herself before heading back into a celebration that hadn't felt like hers. Tonight was different. Tonight, the celebration was hers. Theirs. Ethan appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He'd removed his jacket and loosened his tie, and in the soft light from the strings overhead, he looked younger, more at ease than Grace had ever seen him. Hiding? He teased gently, handing her a glass. No, Grace said, surprised to realize it was true. Just taking a moment to appreciate how much has changed. Ethan followed her gaze out over the darkened vineyard. A year ago, I came to this wedding planning to suffer through it alone. Maybe make a few business connections. Leave as early as socially acceptable. He turned to her, his expression soft. Then I saw you sitting at that table, looking like you were trying to disappear, and something in me just knew. Knew what? That you were different. That you were real. Ethan's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. That you might be the person who could save me from the half-life I'd been living. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. We saved each other. They stood like that for a long moment, watching the stars emerge overhead, listening to the distant sound of music and laughter from inside. Tomorrow, they would leave for their honeymoon, 2 weeks in Italy, away from media and scrutiny and the remnants of the scandal that had nearly destroyed them. But tonight, they simply existed in this perfect, peaceful moment. Grace? Ethan's voice was quiet. Thank you for taking a chance on me. On us. I know it wasn't easy. Grace straightened, turning to face him fully. You want to know something? Even with everything that happened, Liam, the threats, the investigation, I would do it all again. Because it led to this. To you. To us. Standing here as husband and wife. Ethan's eyes shone in the dim light. No more contracts. No more contracts, Grace agreed. Just promises. Just love, Ethan added. Just forever, Grace finished. He kissed her then, slow and thorough, and Grace felt the last piece of her old self, the invisible girl, the forgotten twin, the woman who had believed she would never be enough. Finally let go. In its place was someone new, someone strong, someone seen, someone loved. When they finally returned to the reception to say their final goodbyes, Grace caught sight of herself in one of the mirrors lining the hall. She paused, studying her reflection. The woman in the wedding dress, Ethan's arm around her waist, happiness radiating from every feature. For so long, Grace had looked in mirrors and seen only what she lacked, what she wasn't, who she could never be. Now she saw exactly who she was. And she was enough. More than enough. She was everything. As they drove away from the vineyard that night, tin cans rattling behind their car and friends cheering from the steps, Grace looked back one last time, at the venue where her story had begun, where she had been invisible, where everything had changed. Ethan's hand found hers across the console, squeezing gently. Ready for our next adventure, Mrs. Davis? Grace smiled, turning to face forward, toward the road ahead, toward the future they would build together. With you? Always. And as they disappeared into the night, leaving behind the performance and pretense and pain of the past year, Grace realized that the greatest gift Ethan had given her wasn't visibility or access or protection. It was the courage to finally, completely be herself, and to know that herself was more than enough. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. New emotional stories about dignity, injustice, and unexpected love are waiting for you.